In the winter of 1692, a bizarre crisis gripped Salem Village, Massachusetts. 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began suffering from violent fits. They twisted into bizarre contortions and claimed unseen forces were actively choking and pinching them. This pyramid maps the rigid reality of Puritan society. It was a strict patriarchy where adult men held absolute legal and theological authority at the peak. Young girls occupied the very foundation of the culture, expected to remain completely silent, docile, and legally dependent. Within weeks, that social structure inverted. These disenfranchised children were suddenly standing in courtrooms, pointing fingers and commanding the attention of the colony's highest male authorities. They seized this influence through a legal mechanism called spectral evidence. The girls testified that an accused witch's spirit was leaving her body. Because the specter was invisible to everyone except the accusers, defendants had no possible way to disprove the charge. Giving children the power to execute adults defies basic logic, but the magistrates accepted it because the girls had activated a theological weapon that had been in development for centuries. The Puritan worldview was heavily filtered through the biblical story of Genesis, specifically the story of Eve and original sin. This interpretation defined women as inherently frail. They were considered intellectually weaker than men and uniquely susceptible to demonic temptation. In 1486, a Catholic inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer took these suspicions and codified them into a formal legal manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. Kramer explicitly argued that witchcraft was driven by what he called an insatiable female carnal lust. He used the text to formally link femininity to spiritual inferiority, transforming cultural prejudice into a documented legal justification for persecution. The manual standardized the female witch archetype across the continent, providing courts with a formal methodology for identifying and prosecuting women. The Puritans were fiercely Protestant and actively rejected Catholic authority, yet they thoroughly absorbed Kramer's ideological framework. Tracking this timeline shows how that ideology migrated. Over 200 years, the core arguments of the Malleus Maleficarum moved out of Catholic Europe and across the Atlantic. By 1692, the belief that women were prone to satanic alliance was a foundational societal baseline in New England. When the Salem girls claimed they were being attacked by female spirits, the magistrates were already conditioned to believe them. The church had spent centuries teaching them to expect exactly this kind of betrayal from women. As the crisis escalated, the circle of accusers groomed to include older teenagers like Ann Putnam Jr. and Mary Warren. A specific pattern emerged in the people they chose to target. This matrix shows the early accusations were rarely random, targeting women who defied Puritan boundaries. The first accused were the most vulnerable, enslaved Tutuba and impoverished Sarah Good. Soon they named argumentative women and widows who stood to inherit land. In a society built on female submission, a woman with her own money or a habit of speaking her mind threatened the established order. Without male protection, these women were completely exposed. These disenfranchised girls found their only taste of authority by turning the church's systemic misogyny against the most vulnerable women in their town. Modern observers often describe the Salem witch trials as a temporary panic or a glitch in an otherwise rational justice system. The actual records show a consistent logic that connects the interpretation of Eve in Genesis to the inquisitorial manuals of the 1400s, providing the legal justification for the Salem executions. The events of 1692 were the ultimate execution of a legal framework designed from its inception to eliminate women who threatened the social order.